Our reporter Ngcukaitobi in studio with us to give us more clarity on the latest developments in Zimbabwe. Very good morning to you, Ngcukaitobi. Thank you so much for joining us. Well, I suppose the issues now, everybody wants to know, why are we not allowed to see the live feed taking of what the proceedings are inside the Constitutional Court? Is it the ZANU-PF that makes that ruling, or the national broadcaster?
Well, remember, this is actually the very first time in Zimbabwe that court proceedings are broadcast anyway. And obviously, international media would have wanted, including ourselves, to be in that court. But then the Constitutional Court of Zimbabwe only gave the Zimbabwe Broadcasting Corporation the rights to broadcast those proceedings. And of course, the Zimbabwe Broadcasting Corporation then in turn is levying costs at other broadcasters at a cost of about $13,500 per day, about $1,500 a day for television. And for radio, I think it's something like $725 per hour for radio feed. So I think a lot of the broadcasters, at such short notice, many of them thought maybe it might be too much. I know that some have decided to maybe take about an hour of that feed, and we'll get some of it later on in the day. But that's particularly the reason why we're not able to see it. Now, of course, the Media Institute of Southern Africa, the Zimbabwe chapter, went to court yesterday and lodged an urgent application that was challenged by the president-elect Emmerson Mnangagwa. They were asking the court to reconsider that decision to allow independent producers to be able to live stream. Of course, you know that social media is very big. People now follow YouTube and other channels so that they're able to see it. Misa was saying that more people are not able to see TV during the day at work, and yet they'll be able to see the social media channels. More people outside of the country in the diaspora would not be able to watch the SABC from outside of the country. So they were saying that at least independent producers would be able to stream the proceedings live. But of course, the court ruled in Emmerson Mnangagwa's favor, and they said that only the Zimbabwe Broadcasting Corporation would be able to broadcast.
But I mean, what are the implications of that? We've seen reports also this morning coming out saying that the media can bring no recording devices. They can only bring their notebooks and pens inside there. What does this then say about transparency? Everybody has a vested interest in this case, and the whole world wants to know. And of course, the first people to bring that live is the media.
Well, I think, unfortunately, that is sort of the Westminster style of law, if you like, because, I mean, if you look at where the legal systems of the countries that were colonized by Britain come from, that's how it's done. Actually, in court, you're not even allowed a camera to take a picture. That's why you'll find that they do sketches of the people who are on the stand, and reporters can only take notes. So they have actually gone back instead of going forward, because in other countries, the media is allowed to stream proceedings at any point.
Look, speaking about the proceedings inside the court, we understand now there's a whole cloud around what Dali and Ngcukaitobi are actually doing inside the court in Taiwan. But let's first understand why they were not allowed to participate in the legal proceedings today.
According to the justice system of Zimbabwe, for other advocates from outside of the country to practice in Zimbabwe, the country where they're from ought to have a reciprocity arrangement with Zimbabwe. In other words, advocates from Zimbabwe should be able to practice in that country. Now, what the Minister of Justice is saying is that South Africa does not have a reciprocity arrangement with Zimbabwe, which means that as far as we know, at least as far as he understands, that advocates from Zimbabwe should not be able to automatically practice in South Africa. So what he's saying, for that reason, he was not going to approve their exemption, because they need an exemption from the Minister of Justice. So that has not now been granted. So they are back in court. While they were kicked out earlier, they are back in court, but just as ordinary people. So they're allowed in just to view the proceedings, but not to stand in front of the judge and actually conduct the proceedings or speak on behalf of the applicant, who is Nelson Chamisa.
And how long do we know if they're going to actually have a shot at representing the MDC alliance?
Well, remember that as far as we know, the proceedings are supposed to conclude today. The decision is supposed to be given today. So that means that probably they will not be able, if the Minister of Justice doesn't make a decision today or doesn't change his mind today, then it means they will not be able to represent Chamisa at all today.
Well, it's very late now in Ntakwana, and I'm thinking the case started around 10 o'clock this morning, so they're basically just spectators in that court. Very interesting to find out from them what actually led to them not being able to do that. But let's talk about this. I mean, we saw the statements there from Mnangagwa there. I want your comments on this in Ntakwana. He says the MDC is trying to challenge a very clear win for the ZANU-PF. And of course, everybody can argue this. It wasn't such a clear win. We've seen some of the inconsistencies around the polls not advertising the numbers that actually came to vote, that turned out to vote outside their polling stations.
This is actually a very mathematical, I think, case. Yeah. Because if you listen to the papers that the MDC has filed, apparently they have got experts to look at the numbers, to look at what are called V11 forms. These are forms that are filled from the polling stations. But one of the first things that they're questioning is, now, people used 3 ballot papers to vote. Now, if you're voting for a candidate for the presidency, you're voting for a constituency, and you're voting for a province, let's say, how is it that the National Assembly election, ZANU-PF comes out with 69% of the vote, which is more than 2/3 of the seats in parliament, and yet for the presidential vote you only get 50.8%. But of course, the other issue that has now come up is that the ZEC itself, the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission, has admitted that there have been clerical errors. And some of the experts that were deployed by the MDC are saying that some of those clerical errors come to numbers as high as 300,000 in terms of the discrepancy. But of course, the ZEC then goes back and says, even if you have that difference, it only affects a change in Mnangagwa's victory of about 0.2%. So at the end of the day, from what they see with the clerical errors, if they factor those in, then his win comes to, if it comes down, it comes to 50.6%, which still is a win according to them. And of course, the other issue that they're bringing, MDC, or rather the ZEC, to the court is that the filing was not consistent in terms of the dates. Now, you know that when advocates Dali, Mpofu and Ngcukaitobi first went to Zimbabwe, it was on the last day, on the 7th day, which is the last day that MDC ought to have filed that petition, and they filed it on the 10th. But the ZEC says that the papers were not complete on that day, and when they were eventually completed on the 11th, it would have meant that the court, when it did not have the complete papers, that filing should not give the court then jurisdiction or the power to hear the case. So the first thing I think that we're going to hear from the lawyers of the ZEC is that the case should be thrown out because it does not meet the requirements for filing a petition. That's number one. But also they're going to say that as the respondents, they were not served precisely or properly in the way that the evidence came to them, because it came on the day after the deadline. So we are waiting to hear what else they have to say.
But I mean, a lot from the ZEC in Ntakwana, because we know they've been largely fingered in terms of flouting all these electoral processes. So very interesting to hear that they now actually are saying that we did actually commit some mistakes in terms of counting and so forth. But isn't it a bit too late? We're already at the Constitutional Court level here.
Look, I think the fact that they are admitting that there were mistakes to start with, I think opens a door.
But they should have done that in the beginning.
For the MDC argument. Today. It opens the door for the MDC argument to start with, you know. So the question is how big a mistake. And of course, you saw the papers of the MDC. There are stacks and stacks of them. So it's a question of what is it that the MDC is going to present to this court in terms of the numbers and their understanding, the mathematicians or whoever it was that was doing the formulas. What are they going to come out with? Because I think only in court are we then going to be able to get a sense of how big it is the clerical errors were.
So basically it is MDC versus the ZEC. It looks that way. Ntakwana, thank you so much for your time. That is our reporter, senior reporter Ntakwana Ngcukaitobi, joining us here in studio, talking to us about the latest developments in Zimbabwe. Blaine, what's Trump